Imagine for a moment that, well, everything you thought you knew about societal collapse was fundamentally wrong. What if it wasn't some random, cataclysmic end, but actually a predictable, maybe even recurring pattern woven throughout history? And here's the really challenging part. What if, for most people, these collapses actually led to better conditions? That's a thought that genuinely flips our usual understanding, right? Fate versus these discernible forces in human history. We believe that some books, well, they really demand rigorous examination, not just passive acceptance. So for this deep dive, we're bringing you a full, in-depth critique.
Exactly. Our approach today isn't just a summary, it's a systematic analysis. We've applied a step-by-step critical thinking framework, much like the methods advocated by Richard Paul and Linda Elder. We're meticulously mapping the claims in the book to the evidence presented. And we've also utilized an intellectual framework inspired by Mortimer J. Adler's work to sort of categorize and assess the different kinds of insights Kemp offers.
Right. And crucially, we've used principles like the Golden Rule and spirit of the U.S. Preamble. We're using those to identify ethical asymmetries, basically, where the burdens and benefits might be distributed unfairly in these societal structures. Our ultimate goal, as always, is a logical analysis leading to a balanced conclusion for you.
Okay, so today our focus is Goliath's Curse, The History and Future of Societal Collapse by Luke Kemp. Kemp, he's a research associate at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge. And he presents this really powerful thesis in the book, kind of bridges his historical sociology and global risk analysis. He argues that societal collapse isn't this chaotic, apocalyptic thing. It's actually a recurring pattern and is consistently driven by things like increasing inequality, elite overreach, and the inherent fragility of these large, centralized Goliath societies.
And what's particularly provocative, as I mentioned, is his contention that historically these collapses have often led to better conditions for ordinary people, as these oppressive, top-heavy systems break down. So it's not always the end of the world as we know it, maybe more of a radical simplification, a reset. He wrote this book against a very specific kind of tense global backdrop, didn't he?
Absolutely. Yeah, the book really emerges at a time of, well, escalating climate change, you see democratic decline in places, and a whole host of these interconnected global risks. So, in this context, Goliath's curse acts as both a, let's say, sobering diagnosis of where we might be heading, and also a stark warning for our really interconnected modern world. It really compels us to look at the patterns of the past to hopefully better understand the potential paths for our future.
And what's really unique about today's deep dive is that you are experiencing a two-host AI conversation. It's powered by Google's NotebookLM, and it's designed for a deeper, more dynamic critique of this fascinating book.
So let's start by really mapping Kemp's claims to the evidence he puts forward. His central claim is pretty striking. Collapse isn't some historical anomaly, it's patterned. He argues that concentrated hierarchy and entrenched inequality are consistent, powerful predictors of system failure across millennia, really, transcending specific cultures or time periods.
Yeah, what immediately grabbed me was just the sheer ambition of his research. He's not just looking at a few isolated cases, is he? It's an incredibly wide net he casts across history.
Indeed. He provides really robust empirical backing. He draws on archaeological, anthropological, historical records spanning over 5,000 years and covering more than 440 distinct civilizations. For instance, he examines the fall of Rome, the Aztec Empire, numerous dynastic changes in China. Identifying these common threads, he doesn't just list them, though. He meticulously traces how structural issues like, say, wealth disparity or political centralization consistently precede these periods of rapid societal decline across all these diverse contexts.
That sheer volume of data, and the consistency of the patterns he pulls out, it makes his argument incredibly compelling. It's hard to just dismiss it when you're presented with such a broad, consistent historical record like that.
It certainly is. The book's deep systems approach, identifying these recurring structural patterns over millennia. It brings a new kind of coherence to why collapses happen. He effectively connects the dots,
Yeah.
unifying what might seem like totally separate historical events under a consistent, maybe even predictive framework.
Okay, let's try looking at this through that Adlerian intellectual framework you mentioned. When you're talking about the future, there's always an element of speculation, right?
Okay.
How does Kemp distinguish between what he presents as, say, empirically verifiable knowledge and what might be considered more like opinion or projection in the book?
Yeah, that's a crucial distinction, and Adler's framework really helps here. Kemp's predictive claims, like his assertion that a modern collapse is likely to be global and potentially irrecoverable, those are presented essentially as opinion. They're based on extrapolating trends from historical data, sure, but by their very nature, they're open to reasonable disagreement.
Hmm.
The future's just inherently probabilistic, isn't it?
So the past gives us a record of what has happened, which is knowledge. But the future is a projection of what might happen, which stays in the realm of opinion, even if it's really well-informed opinion.
Precisely. In contrast, his extensive historical analyses, the ones drawing from those massive data sets about inequality and hierarchy being consistent drivers of collapse, those very much qualify as knowledge. These are empirically supported observations about what has demonstrably happened again and again across numerous societies.
That makes sense. Okay, so how does Goliath's curse move beyond just laying out historical facts and knowledge? How does Kemp synthesize all this into a deeper understanding of why these events occur? And then, critically, how does he attempt to translate that into practical wisdom for our future?
Well, the work brilliantly synthesizes this historical knowledge into a coherent understanding of why collapses happen. It unifies these seemingly disparate instances from the past. It's definitely not just a collection of case studies, it's more like a unified theory of collapse. And then, yes, Kemp attempts to translate this understanding into practical wisdom. He recommends specific actions for our future, things like greater democratization, more equity in how resources are distributed, and enhancing resilience at a societal level. So he moves from diagnosing historical problems to prescribing potential solutions for today.
Right. Having seen how Kemp seems to carefully define what he knows versus what he projects, the next logical step is to look at the internal structure of his argument. How coherent is it, really?
Kemp's core argument, that the very things making Goliath societies powerful, like extreme centralization and scale, eventually sow the seeds of their own downfall, is actually remarkably logically consistent. It aligns quite well with modern systems theory, which often highlights how internal dynamics and these self-reinforcing feedback loops can lead to eventual system instability. The very mechanisms designed for strength and growth can, paradoxically, become critical points of vulnerability.
But I mean, when you're dealing with such a huge historical scope, and then trying to project those patterns onto our unique globalized world, there's always a risk of oversimplifying things, isn't there? Are there any potential fallacies in the book's reasoning that, we should be mindful of?
That's a fair point. While the historical analysis is strong, the leap from these past cases to, let's say, deterministic forecasts for our uniquely globalized world, well, it does contain some risk of overgeneralization or maybe reductionism. And this is a nuance that's actually acknowledged by thoughtful reviewers, which I think speaks to Kemp's own intellectual honesty. It's important for you, the listener, to remember that the modern context introduces incredibly complex variables, things like unprecedented technological interconnectedness or novel forms of global governance, things that just weren't present in the same way in past collapses.
That's a really important distinction for us to grasp the difference between historical patterns and future predictions, especially when our world is changing so incredibly fast. Now let's maybe turn our ethical lens onto Kemp's proposals. How do they line up with principles like the Golden Rule?
Well, Kemp's advocacy for reforms promoting greater equity. That directly resonates with the Golden Rule approach, doesn't it? He's aiming to minimize harm for the most vulnerable people within a society and distribute benefits more justly. Basically, ensuring that those at the bottom aren't disproportionately burdened or exploited by systemic failures, his solutions inherently promote a kind of moral reciprocity across different societal layers.
Okay, and thinking about the spirit of the U.S. Preamble, those ideals of unity, justice, general welfare, how does the book's reform agenda connect with those, maybe even on a global scale?
The book's reform agenda, when you consider its broader implications, it fundamentally seeks to enhance unity, justice, tranquility, general welfare, and liberty, but potentially on a planetary scale. It pushes for systemic changes that, at least in theory, could benefit humanity as a whole by making societies more resilient and, frankly, fairer. However, and this is a big however, the feasibility of actually implementing such large-scale reforms in our highly globalized, pluralistic societies, that's understandably a subject of pretty intense debate and practical challenge. Right, let's shift now into a wisdom assessment. Let's consider the long-term consequences of collapse as Kemp portrays them. What's his perspective on the social impact? Is it really just this catastrophic end of everything?
Yeah, here's where Kemp offers that really counterintuitive perspective. He argues that collapse isn't necessarily the ultimate end. It's more like a rapid simplification. He kind of views it as a reset, a structural purge, maybe that can, paradoxically, lead to fairer distributions of resources and actually better outcomes for the many, especially for those who were previously marginalized or oppressed by those complex Goliath structures. It sort of suggests that complexity itself can sometimes be a burden, not just a blessing.
And from an economic standpoint, Kemp issues a pretty stark warning about the catastrophic potential of collapse, particularly given our current global interconnectedness. I mean, if one major part of our global economy fails, the ripple effects, the cascades could be immense. He stresses that true resilience comes not from centralized control, but actually from democratized structures and more local autonomy. When systems are too interconnected and too centralized, a failure in one spot can indeed cascade globally with unprecedented speed.
That's a powerful point about interconnectedness, something previous collapses might not have experienced quite like that. And what about the spiritual or religious impact? How does Kemp weave that into his framework?
Well, the book tends to treat religion as a bit of a double-edged sword. Historically, it can act as an amplifier of hierarchy and centralization, often propping up elite power. However, Kemp also acknowledges its potential as a critical resource for renewed social cohesion and identity, in the wake of collapse, helping communities rebuild. But while he touches on this, it's more nuanced and diverse roles in contemporary globalized societies, and their potential for fostering either division or unity are perhaps a bit underexplored in the grand sweep.
Okay, so let's try and distill the core strengths of Goliath's Curse. What truly stands out about this book for you?
Well, its strengths are pretty considerable. The book's data-driven, broad-scope analysis, pulling from millennia of history, is genuinely impressive. That's number one. It constructs this coherent narrative that compellingly links past patterns of collapse to present risks and potential future trajectories. And it offers a very direct, unflinching engagement with critical issues like power dynamics, inequality, systemic fragility, things that are arguably more relevant now than ever.
And on the flip side, where might the book have some weaknesses? Or maybe areas for further exploration that could, enhance its arguments?
Well, while it's robust, it maybe dedicates less attention to the inherent unpredictability of human behavior and also positive adaptation, especially in modern contexts. As we discussed, some of its predictive claims might over-extrapolate a bit from historical data, perhaps not fully accounting for genuinely new variables in our world. And additionally, the really nuanced roles of specific religious beliefs, cultural identities, rapid technological change, those contemporary factors are sometimes a bit underdeveloped in his broader historical sweep. They could add extra layers of complexity.
Speaking of finding profound insights and rational thought, this seems like a good moment. For those seeking even more, remember to check out Mindful Moments.
Right. Our YouTube channel offers AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and other deep dives, all really designed to inspire reflection and rational thought. It's a perfect companion, really, for anyone looking to nourish their mind on the go, complementing what we explore right here. So to summarize, Kemp's book stands as this historically rich and profoundly thought-provoking critique of societal fragility. It really challenges us to consider the long-term impacts of inequality and calls for equity and creative reform. It definitely excels in mapping data to claims, shows logical rigor, and embodies those Adlerian epistemic virtues by distinguishing knowledge from opinion. Yet, its most urgent warnings, well, they should prompt both critical engagement and further research, not just, resignation or dogmatic acceptance.
And just so you know, for this detailed critique, we drew upon a systematic and precise framework. Our analysis considered works by prominent scholars like Jared Diamond, Joseph Tainter, Peter Turchin. Their insights have really shaped how we understand civilizational dynamics. We also incorporated alternative perspectives, including critiques of the whole collapse literature genre, and counter-arguments focusing on resilience and adaptation. We did that to ensure a balanced and comprehensive review for you.
Yeah, this book really asks us to confront the uncomfortable truth that collapse, historically speaking, isn't always the final end. It can be a potentially transformative reset. So the provocative thought for you is this. If society were to significantly simplify, what would be the core values you would strive to rebuild? And what would you prioritize to ensure a more equitable outcome for everyone?
For the in-depth book analysis that complements this critique, just click the link on screen. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and, as always, think rationally. See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.